and it will never stop, and it doesn't matter what your intentions are. And this leads me to the second great incompatibility. Technological unemployment. This one's a lot of fun. I was asked recently in an interview what I thought about the $15 an hour minimum wage raise proposal, the fast food raise, as it's been called. And I replied that it was irrelevant in the long run. And the interviewer was quite confused and actually got kind of indignant. They expected me to, jump on board. So I explained that these wage increases in that sector of the economy will do nothing but further incentivize something restaurants have been contemplating for a long, long time. And that is the full automation of menial jobs. And just watch, I guarantee it. I give it 3 years max before one major fast food chain sets the cost efficiency precedent, and like dominoes, the rest will follow. Labor simply can't win in this equation. It will become too cheap. Now, for those unfamiliar with the history of technological unemployment, it was made popular by a famous economist named John Maynard Keynes when he said in 1930, "We are being afflicted with a new disease of which some readers may not yet have heard the name, but of which they will hear a great deal in the years to come, namely technological unemployment. This means unemployment due to our discovery of means of economizing the use of labor, outpacing the pace at which we can find new uses for labor." But this is only a temporary phase of maladjustment. All this means is that in the long run, mankind is solving its economic problem. It will all happen gradually. We shall endeavor to spread the bread thin on the butter to make what work there is still to be done to be as widely shared as possible, sharing work. 3-hour shifts or a 15-hour work week may put off the problem for a great while. Now, his comments on this are quite vague, really. But they appear to suggest, or they set the seed for two major historical fallacies regarding this issue. It assumes that the market economy essentially is, it assumes the market economy is equipped, I should say, to handle this new advent of machine automation becoming cheaper and more efficient than human labor. The first we could call the Luddite fallacy. The Luddite fallacy was a response that basically said that new technology doesn't destroy jobs, it just changes the composition of jobs in the economy. Put another way, for every job lost due to technology, a new job is assumed to take its place, usually in some new capacity. And while this perspective may have seemed viable during early periods of slow technological change, the ever-exponential advancement of automation today is now far outpacing the creation of new human-exclusive labor roles. And it is simply a matter of time before it becomes more cost-effective, reliable and productive, safer in all economic fields. It's just a matter of time. And there are numerous corroborating studies showing the capacity of automation, including the conclusion that right now, over half of the world's jobs can be mechanized. Furthermore, human employment is now actually inverse to productivity in most cases, meaning it not only removes jobs because it's cheaper, it increases output efficiency greatly. Here's a classic charted example from manufacturing. The blue line is the increase in production, and the red line is human employment. The second fallacy is the assumption that this shift will happen so gradually we'll be able to figure out ways to compensate for it through time, such as sharing the job market, or reducing work hours and raising wages. Perhaps even mass-produced abundance will create cost savings that will trigger deflation in currency value, and eventually you'll have an equilibrium consistently morphing where, say, $1,000 will enable you to buy a $200,000 home in a financial equivalency today. And this has been talked about, this is actually talked about a lot these days. You hear a lot of this coming from like the Austrian school. They say, oh, we're just going to keep adjusting all the economic metrics. It's going to happen naturally. The market will take care of it. Well, if this is going to happen, then why hasn't it happened to some degree in the past 50 years of this ever-increasing productivity? Actually, the opposite has happened. Today, people work more than ever, and inflation keeps growing. Why hasn't it happened? Well, it's actually really obvious if you look at the mechanics of the way people are forced to think. The gaming strategy. Going back to number 3 regarding the characteristics of a market, The structural incentive strategy is based upon competition for demand, all oriented around the interest to A, save money on production, and B, maximize profits upon final sales. And these rules, when in dynamic system interplay, when they're set in motion, they systemically disallow the progression of spreading the wealth or reducing the work week, or reversing inflation, and the like. It really isn't that profound if you just think about it, when you think about what each individual player in aggregate is forced to do in order to keep the game going. And you'll see that the idea of this kind of trickle-down thing is just nonsense. For example, when a company like Amazon.com decides to automate its distribution center, removing human labors, it does so in order to save money and increase profits, right? Yes. Now, it might reduce its fees to some effect, and it might even pay some of the other employees a little bit more. But the truth, really, is that they do this to simply be competitive against other producers in whatever way they need to keep going. The gaming logic has nothing to do with any kind of altruism. It has to do with how they can continue to maintain increased profits, high cost efficiency, or low input costs. And these mechanisms will continue to unfold regardless of any intention to spread the wealth. It's just assumed that way in this bogus trickle-down crap that we've been hearing about for years, which is firmly debunked in the general economic premise of it, and this new kind of technological or techno trickle-down effect that the equalization of the economy will occur with less work hours, higher wages, and deflation is equally as ridiculous. It's not going to happen. It hasn't happened, and I wish people would stop talking about it. And I'll put it even more so. It's further debunked. This is further debunked, not only by the fact that people are working more hours today and all that. It's further debunked by the fact that over the past few decades with huge advancements in productive efficiency, virtually all the growth we've seen, all the profit and wealth, has gone to the upper 1-2%. That's why the billionaires are flying and the wages are stagnating. That's why 1% of the world will own 50% of the planet's wealth in just a few years. They are absorbing all the value that has been generated by the exponential increase of productivity. And guess what? That is exactly what they are supposed to do, because that is what the game is designed to facilitate. Moving on. Great incompatibility number 3, public health. So far, I've talked about incompatibilities born out of the Malthusian market system as it clashes against modern technological society and its ever-increasing levels of efficiency. The incompatibility I want to talk about here is a little bit different. This clash has to do with the very core of our shared evolutionary psychology, or human nature itself. You know, declarations about what is or isn't human nature have been endless throughout history. Philosophers have constantly tried to assume humans are hardwired in certain ways, usually using those declarations as a way to justify the existing social order. And the Malthusian system of economics has been no exception. For example, we are told that we are inherently competitive, we are inherently greedy, and materially insatiable. We've all heard this stuff. And the truth of the matter is, as modern sociological science has put forward, and neurological science has put forward, is that we are many things at once. It is the social condition that brings out the behaviors required for a given circumstance. If we need to be competitive, we will be. That doesn't mean that we're always that way. The circumstance sets in motion because we have great neuroplasticity. The problem is we're stuck in a particular circumstance far too often. And this superficial type of work, these conclusions of the past, they've persisted because we really weren't able for a long time to conduct the type of statistical analysis needed, nor the neurological studies needed to make any really viable conclusions. It was just speculative observation. And the one area I want to focus on here is how the market system and its inevitable creation of wealth inequality, a core characteristic, has affected public health on the whole. And the conclusion to be found is that class stratification is one of the most destructive things you can do to human psychology and public health. Again, Class stratification is one of the most consistent characteristics of market capitalism. When we think about health problems, it's historically assumed that problems occurring in the lower classes are caused by direct material conditions, such as bad housing or poor diets, lack of educational opportunities, and so on. This is not the whole story. If you compare groups of people with the same income brackets in different wealthy first world countries, you find that those in more unequal countries, those with the largest internal stratification, do much worse in health than those in more equal countries with the same income. So it doesn't matter in absolute terms, it's relative. Here's a chart about life expectancy. We see a specific sample set of wealthy countries ranked according to how much income inequality exists, along with the average life expectancy within. The y-axis is life expectancy in years, and the x-axis is income inequality from low to high. As you can see, Japan has the highest life expectancy and also the lowest income inequality, while Singapore has the greatest income inequality, topping only the United States. The regression line in the middle shows the trend. And as you can see, lower inequality translates into longer life. Drug use. Here we see the United States as having the highest level of inequality based on the sample set, while also being within the top 4 of countries with the most illegal drug use. Again, you can see the clear regression line showing the obvious relationship where increased inequality creates increased drug use. Mental illness. As you will see, mental illness is much more common in more unequal rich countries. In this sample, the U.S. leads the group in both mental illness and income inequality, while Japan, with the lowest level of inequality, has the least amount of mental illness. Levels of trust or social capital. As you can see in this chart, those that feel they can trust one another are much more common in societies with less inequality. This is pretty commonly assumed. It's really obvious. Anyway, mistrust and inequality obviously reinforce each other. We often don't think about trust as an issue of public health, but it actually is a very important one on the sociological level. Educational scores. Not only do more unequal countries have worse educational attainment, kids are also more likely to drop out of school as well. Homicide rates. As you can see, the United States blows every other relatively rich nation out of the water when it comes to homicide. In fact, violence itself is probably the most established attribute of social inequality than anything else. Rates of imprisonment, similar enough, much higher in unequal countries, of course. However, what's interesting about this is that it doesn't just relate to the rates of crime, it also has to do with the punitive attitudes. And this is fascinating. The more unequal the society, the harsher the punishments, or the more strict the laws are for a given offense, etc. More people are put into prison for longer periods of time than in more equal countries. I find that particularly disturbing. It means that deep class stratification makes the society mean. Social mobility. This is fun. Social mobility has to do, of course, with the class relationship you have at birth and how easy it is for you to move up out of that class during your life. And as you can see by this chart, the United States, home of the American dream and the highest manifestation of capitalism, of course, has the lowest social mobility rate of all the countries sampled. This list goes on and on. Infant mortality, higher in more unequal countries. Obesity, higher in more equal countries. Teenage birth rates, higher in more equal countries, etc. And here is a summation chart of the points we've just examined. It shows life expectancy, math literacy, infant health, infant mortality, homicides, imprisonment, teen birth rates, trust, obesity, mental illness, drugs and alcohol use, and social mobility. And as you can see, the United States, with its high level of stratification, the ultimate embodiment of capitalism in its truest form, as most would admit, is the absolute worst in the entire world when it comes to first world countries. And by the way, the reason they sample first world nations is because it's a phenomenon that exists where there's a lot of difference happening in incomes, of course, a certain type of difference. For example, you can't go into a very poor country that still behaves in the, sort of the feudal era. The samples don't work because, well, actually most of those countries, the vast majority of people are already in such deprivation, they're not even aware, frankly, of how they're deprived. So if you want to read more about that, it's very fascinating. You can read the book The Spirit Level by Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett.